Hello and welcome to this Android Reverse tutorial brought to you by North Border Software. This is part 3 of the series looking at reverse geocoding. And I bet you're thinking, how long is it going to be before we get into the actual geocoding itself? Well, that's in the next part. In this part we're going to look at runtime permissions. It's something we need to do to complete the mini application of getting the location into the device itself. And in fact there is a method we need to call on for the reverse geocoder that does require location-based permissions to be granted, so it's a subject we do have to look at. So as you'll probably recall, or probably well know by now, that in Android Marshmallow, which is Android 6, there was a change which required the user to explicitly grant or deny permissions to things like locations or the phone. These permissions are classed as dangerous permissions in the Android system. It's something we need to probably just dig into a little bit deeper and just have a look at. So the changes were made in Android 6.0. The Android system defines normal permissions and dangerous permissions. Now, normal permissions are those that don't risk the user's privacy, so things like the network state, internet access are fine. They're classed as normal permissions, and they're handled in the existing way in the manifest, where you just actually just state the permission itself. Dangerous permissions still need to be added to the manifest, but those are the ones that can actually give away the user's confidential data. So I do have a list of dangerous permissions here, and you can see you've got things like the calendar, the camera, the contacts are obvious things that can give away personal information, location as well, and that's what I'm going to be working on in this particular tutorial. So just continuing this list here, obviously things around the phone and text-based as well. So you can actually go to the Android developers website, and that will give you an up-to-date list of what are dangerous permissions and normal permissions. Now let's get back to the programming. Okay, so into the programming now. The first thing I want to do is actually define a constant value. So let's just put this at the top here. So it will be private, and it'd be static final, and it'd be an integer value. And I'm just going to call it my permissions request find location. I'm going to set it to a nominal value of 101. It can be any value you want. Now the purpose of this will become a little bit clearer later on. So just take those typos out. Okay, so next thing I need to do is go down to the logic here where the permissions were actually granted. Now I did state in the last part I wasn't really happy the way this is actually constructed. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make some changes. The first thing to note is that the find location is the only one that's actually in the manifest. So you can see from the manifest here I've only actually granted permission to the find location. The reason for this is that when we grant permissions for the find location, the permissions for the course location is automatically implied, so we only need to actually deal with the find location itself. So all I need to do when we come back to this Java is we need to take the reference, or I want to take the reference out to the course location. So I'm just going to delete this section of code here. So just dealing with that. I'll just clear that away. So that was automatically generated. The other thing I want to change is I don't really like this negative logic. This says that if the permission for the find location has not been granted, then we'll do something about calling the permissions. I'm going to change this to equals to. So now what we can do now is actually just delete this return statement. And what I'll do, I'll take this statement here, we'll cut that, and put that in there. So just format the code. So now what we're saying is that if the permissions for the find location has been granted, then we'll start the location updates. Else we need to actually go about getting the permissions. So ask for permissions. Okay, so the way we ask the user for permissions, we need to prompt them with a dialog box. So there's actually a method we call which will then just pop up and ask them a question with a statement in it saying that this app requires permissions for the location-based services, allow it or deny it. So it's just a simple method we need to call, and it's straightforward. It's called requestPermissions. You can see it here. I'm just going to find the access find location. That's what we want there. And we just need to also pass the integer value which we defined my permissions request find location. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of why we need to do that now. When we come to implement the callback method associated with this dialog box, then that will become clear. So let's just get that in for the moment. It'll be my permissions granted find location. Okay, so you'll see here as well that we've got a little error. You will recall by now that the this runtime permission handling is only required for marshmallow Android 6.0 or higher. Anything below that and the permissions were handled at the installation time. So we only need to call this dialog box up if we're running marshmallow or higher. So we need to put an API check in here. So this is what this particular error is asking us to do. So what we'll do, I'll just surround this with the version code to identify whether it's running Android M or higher. So that's done. Android M is M for marshmallow, 6.0 higher. So that's kind of done. So what we need to go on to do now is add a callback method. When this dialog box is presented to the user is going to respond with an allow or deny. So we need a callback method associated with this request permissions dialog box, and that's what we're going to implement now. So let's just go to the bottom here. We can just put it at the bottom here. So it'll be on request permissions result. Okay, so let's just get on with some code. So really we've got two situations. One is when the permission is granted, and one is when the permission is denied. So what we need to do first of all, now we're going to come back to this request code, this integer value which we placed up here, and we made this 101. So you've got to bear in mind that this is a single callback method here associated with what could be numerous permissions. So when we go down to the callback method, we need to know which permission we're actually dealing with. Now I've associated the find location with an integer value of 101. If we're dealing with the phone, I might want to give that an integer value of 102. And typically you would have a switching case in the callback method to actually handle those specific situations. As it is, we've only got the one, but I'm still going to put a reference to the result code. This is that integer value is now actually passed as the result code in this particular callback method. So it'll be if request code, and that could be equal to 101, or it could be equal to my request find location. So if it's that, then we're going to just go on and just handle the permissions for the find location. So first of all I need to do is just check that what to do when the permission is granted. So we need to look at the grant results, and you'll see it's an array as well, because again you could have multiple permissions involved here. So it'll be if grant results 0 equals package manager granted. You see here you've got options for permission granted and permission denied. I'll take the permission granted, and all we need to do actually, if the permission is granted, is do nothing. We just carry on. So yeah, we could put a message up there saying that permission is granted, but for the moment we don't need to do actually anything here. So permission is granted, do nothing. Okay, so we need to then deal with the situation if it's denied. So all I want to do is I'll show display a toast message to say that the permissions need to be granted, and we'll actually finish the app, because there's really no point in running the app if the permissions for location aren't granted. So let's just put our toast in. Let's get application context. And so we'll show it just short, I think. And we just need to finish the app. Okay, so that's all we actually need to do in terms of coding. So I think what we'll do is just have a review of what we've actually done so far. So we started off by defining this integer constant here, which is the request code. The 101, which we nominated, relates to the location-based services. We can nominate any value there. If I was looking to work with the camera as well, I'll probably define my permissions request camera and make that equal to 102. If I was working with the contacts, I might make that equal to 103. So I really want a request code per permission I'm actually working with. What we did then was we changed the default code to just simply work with the find location, and we made it equivalent to say that if the permissions have been granted, then we will turn on the location-based services. If they hadn't been granted in this else statement here, then we'd actually pop up the dialog box to ask the user to allow or deny the permissions. And obviously we surrounded that with a permission check, because this only applies to Android M, which is marshmallow 6.0 or higher. And then we have the callback method. So when the user responds to the dialog box, this callback method is initiated, and we simply pass the request code in. So we're doing a check to see if the response contains the request code of 101, and if it does, then we actually need to do nothing if the permissions were granted. Else we'll just pop a toast up to say that we need to grant those permissions, and we'll terminate the app because there's no point in carrying on. So what we'll do now, we'll go on and actually test this application. Okay, so we've got the application loaded on the emulator now. So I'm just going to start the application reverse geocoder, and you can see it's actually prompting the user for the permissions for the location-based services. I'm going to just deny that initially. You can see it's just popped the toast up to say that the permissions need to be granted. So on this time we'll run it, we'll allow the permissions. And what we need to do now, push a location into the emulator. So I don't know if you're worried about these extended commands here. If you hit the three buttons, see the three dots, then you'll get this dialog box come up, and we've got some locations here. So we can actually just edit the location itself there. Let's put a latitude of that, and latitude of 58 and longitude of -51 degrees, and we just need to send that to the emulator. You see that's actually printed out the location quite well. So let's just change that and make this 152. You can see that's actually registered in the application itself. So at last, after 3 parts, we've actually got a base app where we can seed the location into device ready for the reverse geocoding, which will start in part 4. So I hope you found this one useful. Catch you in the next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you find this tutorial useful. All the project files and source code are available for download on my website. Thank you.